Hi, my name is Gerard Heidgerken. I'm the author of Godsquatter. And the most important advice I ever got actually came from a fortune cookie. And I actually have it right here because it reads, "Your most important work is yet to come." Panda Express.
That's brilliant. That's good. So great book, by the way, Gerard, writing about potatoes. Gotta love that. So that's fun, man. So how has that advice helped you, man? How have you used that in your life? What's the connection there for you, man?
Well, a lot of it comes down to, and like so many things, context matters. And this came to me when I was, I had kind of made a bit of a career shift that wasn't really of my choosing. And so I was at a new job that wasn't challenging me or fulfilling in the way that my old career used to be. In other words, I moved from Milwaukee, where I was happy at an agency, and now I'm doing work in LA. And LA, you're moving to LA. You're supposed to do bigger things, better things. You don't move from Milwaukee to LA to have you saying that, your best days are behind you. No, you got to be doing new stuff, great stuff. And that just wasn't panning out. And I was struggling. It's like, really, is this it? And yeah, it was just a fortune cookie, but it came at the right time. And your most important stuff is yet to come. Doesn't tell me what that's going to look like. So, but that thought there, that like, no, there's more. And I'm not someone who believes in fortune cookies, but it's like, I got to hold on to this anyways, because I need to believe this right now.
Awesome, man. I dig that. That's really good. So, hey, so you and I started connecting back when in the good old days back in Milwaukee. But before that, we were both in the Navy. Remind me, my friend, what did you do when you were in the Navy? What was your job?
I was a nuclear machinist mate, and I was on board the USS Enterprise. And you wouldn't know this, but I learned this listening to one of your earlier podcasts, that we have even a few more connections Navy wise, because you had on, I think it was a Navy chaplain.
Army chaplain. Yep. David
Army
Canada.
chaplain.
Yep.
Okay. And God, what was it? It was like the one that I'm remembering, who I kind of connected with while I was on the Enterprise. It was all about circus skills. He was into juggling and magic. And I remember that yours was a very similar story to that.
He was a clown. Yeah.
Okay. He was a clown. Yes. So was mine, doing clowning. Clowning and I have this weird history in itself. I once auditioned for Ringling Brothers on a dare while I was in the Navy. So there was no chance that I was going to get in. Not that I would have gotten in anyways, because I did not do a good job. My background is in the circus arts, is actually as a juggler. And I love juggling, not performing. But if you can juggle, people assume that you're going to perform. And it's like, oh, put on clown makeup. And I wasn't an entertaining juggler. I was a good juggler. There is a difference. But yeah, so I could go off on a whole tangent about the clowning groups that I hooked up with, and the magicians. And there's a whole seedy underbelly in Virginia Beach of circus artists, or at least there was back in those days.
Oh, cool. So you're a land fleet sailor. I was a pack fleet sailor. So that's fun. So how did you pick up the name Bilge Monkey, Gerard?
That's actually another Navy connection. Let's see, this was shortly before the Pirates of the Caribbean movie came out. And I had been into pirates of one shape or another for pretty much my whole life, like a whole lot of kids. But there was this one back when bulletin boards were still the way that people hung out on the internet, which were usually based around some interest. And in this case, it was a pirate interest one. They talk about pirate movies, and some of these people are hardcore pirate reenactors. And I needed a pirate name because you can't go on as Gerard. And so I was trying to come up with something, and I remembered the stories about powder monkeys. Are you familiar with that term?
Mm-mm.
Back in the age of sail, there were young boys on ships that were, because they were small, they could, easily navigate the crowded conditions to run gunpowder to and from the cannons. Now, when I was in the Navy, I was a machinist mate. Now, most of those guys are guerrillas. I was not. I was small, I was wiry, and whenever something had to be done in the bilge, it fell to me because I could crawl down there between all those hot pipes and without getting myself killed. And so I kind of just joined the two names together, from powder monkey. Well, I was never a powder monkey, but I was a bilge monkey. And so that's where the name came from. And it was my name for a lot of years for some pirate projects I was on, but now it's just kind of become synonymous with me, whatever I'm doing.
Yeah, it's interesting because yeah, back when we started hanging out, I remember that and I was like, man, that's so interesting that you would be able to join, bilge, which is, a waste receptacle in many cases, right? The bilge of a ship is where all the crap is,
It also means
right?
nonsense, though.
Oh, so you're the nonsense monkey. Even that one makes a lot more sense, Gerard.
It makes it a little bit more palatable.
That's awesome, man. That is awesome. Well, today though, I want to talk to you more about your book, man, about Godsquatter. So, what the heck, man? What inside you said, I want to write a fiction book about potatoes?
It's really a concept that evolved. In fact, that's part of what made this book such a struggle for me because I really discovered its details as I wrote it. Towards the later stage of when I was writing this, I was also reading Stephen King's On Writing book. And he was describing how, oftentimes, when you're on the right path with writing, it's less that you're creating and more that you're discovering. Like somehow it's already there. And that's what this really was. It was something that I discovered along the way, which is also why I had to go back often and rewrite earlier phases that I thought were done because I discovered where it was going in a way I didn't expect. But it really started with this idea that the stars were wrong. Like, what if you were just looking at the sky one night and you just I don't know my constellations well, but there's those certain shapes and stuff that you're just familiar with. And it's like, what if you're just looking and you're like, you couldn't quite tell why, but you knew they were wrong. And that was really the nugget, which obviously doesn't even remotely begin or lead us intuitively towards potatoes. But from there, it started to grow into the idea of what if it's not, once you realize the stars were wrong, what if you realize that everything is wrong? And I think this is a sensation that we've all had where just, you look around your house, I think there's a term for it even, where it's like, you feel like everything isn't quite, it looks like your stuff, but just somehow it feels a little off. Everything in life is familiar, but it's off. And it's like, but what if that was because something was trying to get inside your brain and tell you that something else was right? To the degree that that one thing was so right, even though you don't even consciously know what that thing is, that everything else by comparison seems wrong. And that thing that was so right, that was planting itself in our brains and saying, no, this is the thing. Everything else is substandard. That one thing that's right is potatoes. And from there, I just started to explore, because it was just curious, because potatoes, you don't really think about them much, except you start looking around the internet and people think about them all the time. They're kind of like the unsung hero of the internet. Yes, cats have, gotten huge and there's all these other internet phenomena that people love and there's Dogecoin and all that stuff, but there's tons of potato jokes out there and there's tons of potato history out there. And some of the internet is loved, but they just haven't really noticed that they love it for the most part. And so that's where I started to just explore potatoes further. And for being a book about potatoes taking over the world, I'd say that it's about 80% true history or based on real events. And I don't know how much you want me to keep rambling about this, but
yeah, let's talk about it, man, because this is interesting, right? So potatoes being the unsung heroes of the internet, and that most of the 80% of here is true. So give me an example of what that is, Gerard, because I think if people haven't picked up the book and learn about Gordon McNamara and his love affair with potatoes, well, let's help them understand more about that. So talk to me. Give me an example of some truth about potatoes that people don't know.
Oh, there's so many, but perhaps the most important in my book is one of the key events that lead to potatoes, because really most of the history of my book, because it delves a little bit into ancient history and all that ancient history is true. Everything before the year 2012 that happens in my book that they learn about is true events. Oxomama, the potato goddess of the Incans. House potatoes. Ancient people would keep them on their mantles for good luck. There's so many things where potatoes were just everywhere. There have been multiple potato wars. My book has a potato war when humanity eventually decides, oh, we're not cool with being controlled to love potatoes. But there have been real potato wars. The War of Bavarian Succession took place in potato country during potato season, and it was a very poorly funded war. So the soldiers didn't have ammunition. So they started throwing potatoes at each other. So this thing became known as a potato war. And then ironically, many of them died of malnutrition. They're so busy using their potatoes for ammunition, and no one thinks to eat these things. But anyways, so one of the really key events, and the one that really, I think, brings the weirdness of my book together with some of its main themes about, because it really is about internet culture, meme culture, influencer culture. Just in my book, all influencer has basically the top of that pyramid is potatoes. And back in 2012, and there's a key moment in my book, but it's also a key moment in our actual internet history. This old woman in Spain took it upon herself to restore an old painting of Jesus. She was not a professional art restorer. She did a bad job. If you Google potato Jesus, you've probably already seen this. But it didn't end there with her. Because, yes, this terrible painting, this terrible featureless painting of Jesus now. But it inspired t-shirts. It inspired other potato paintings. It took the internet by storm. Now, in my book, it just kept going bigger and bigger to where the world just kept loving potatoes more and more, rather than being replaced by the ice bucket challenge and rickrolling and all that, other things that have happened. Mankind discovered potatoes were the top of the food chain, and they just stuck with it. But yeah, real events. And this was the hilarious part. While writing this, and actually while I was editing that chapter, this was in the middle of the pandemic, and I'm editing the chapter about this old woman in Spain. I don't name her because this is very much a real person who did real things. Although there have been other potato Jesuses. It just doesn't end. But I was part of this online writing group, and there was this woman who was part of that group. She was in England, but turns out she's actually originally from Spain. We'd never met before. I'm telling her about this chapter. I'm talking about how the potato Jesus painting inspired lookalikes and t-shirts. And she's like, oh yeah, my brother sold a line of those. It's like,
wow. Who knew that potatoes could be so powerful as a connector between people, right? Your brother sells them, you're writing about them. That's interesting. So, Gerard, why for you though, man? Why potatoes? Why is giving potato a chance such an important thing for you?
For me, it really wasn't about the potatoes going into it. That was something that I kind of discovered along the way. Early on, I was kind of toying with the idea of I don't really get into this particular book. I do imagine some sequels, but I don't get into great detail about where the name Godsquatter comes from. But the idea was, the idea that an advanced civilization, would seem like magic to a primitive civilization. Or I think that there was this, was it like Jack Handy, this old comedian, I think he's on Saturday Night Live, talking about it, cave people be really impressed with all the glow in the dark stuff we have, and we just take it for granted. And so the idea was, alien races that we just take for granted. We wouldn't even notice they're living here among us, but they're just completely boring and look like normal stuff. But if they had been here since ancient times and were trying to become our gods by impressing us with their technology. And so I was imagining they're doing it through the internet. So cats are actually one of these alien species who are trying to gain our adoration. And then, God, I can't even think of it. I was thinking of like the old hamster dance, was that someone trying to get our attention. And because,
Yep.
humans, we just glom on to stuff on the internet and just love it to death. And then we get bored and move on to something else. We all do it. But that original idea about it being a lot of different species all trying to try for our attention, I was like, well, what's the most boring thing? And if it was trying to get our attention and wants to just be loved, it's a boring thing that just wants to be loved. I'm like, what's the most boring thing? And I'm like, potatoes. Potatoes are the most boring thing. See, the thing is, though, I was dead wrong, because the more I researched, the more I learned that they're not boring. It's amazing the history that's behind potatoes. But just writing this book is really what converted me to potatoes, more so than me going into it trying to prove something about potatoes.
So we have vegans, we have pescatarians. What do potato only people? What do you call your people now, Gerard?
Ooh, probably something spud based. Spudivores.
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 That's pretty good. Yeah. If anybody here also loves potatoes as much as Gerard does, let us know what you're calling your people here. So, but in all seriousness, it is a fun book, man. So I'm. You said there's going to be sequels, though. Is Gordy gonna find a girl and actually marry her and maybe have baby spuds, or what are you thinking here?
There's a lot of things that I sort of did almost out of spite. For there's so many things that happen all the time in books that I'm like, there's nothing wrong with this, but does it always have to be that way? Like, does every book have to have a love interest? And it's like, I'm just not feeling it. This book, yes, Gordon McNamara is the main character, but I was also fighting very hard to make him a passive protagonist. He's the person who's in the right place for us to observe the story. And he also is the central piece socially that connects three other far more proactive people: his grandmother, his best friend, and his coworker. And they're really the ones who make stuff happen. He just happens to be the one who's central to the plot, but not really the one who's driving things forward. And I kind of like the idea, because I kind of despise the overuse of the chosen one thing, where it's like, well, just you're decreed to be the one who is the hero of this story. Well, he's central to the story, but he's not its hero in my mind. And actually, one reviewer said it best, because I was imagining this passive protagonist, but a reviewer of my book was talking about how Gordon McNamara is the fast food of heroes. Not the one we really want, not the one that's good for us, but the one who happens to be there. And that's really what he is. He's the person who just happens to be there, but not the one who really brings it.
That's interesting. That's interesting because, yeah, I mean, if we think about Campbell's hero's journey, I'm not, I don't know that Gordon is a mentor, and he certainly isn't Luke, right? If I think about this in Star Wars terms, right, he's not Yoda, and he's not Luke. Is he Finn? I mean, which character do you think he'd be if it was Star Wars?
He's a potato.
But where does that fit in the Star Wars? Everything has to come back to Star Wars, Gerard.
Let's see. Well, I got to stick with thinking about the original trilogy, because anything out of that just confuses me. I lose track.
Is he like Lando? Maybe Lando Calrissian? Is he a vehicle? No,
it's not charming enough for that. Honestly, I mean, maybe he's C-3PO.
There we go.
I mean,
that's interesting.
Because C-3PO is a translator. Gordon McNamara is not a translator, but he's the one whose eyes we see the story through. And he does have a few very small key moments when he does affect the story. But mostly, heck, Dave is his R2, who's actually the one out there hustling and doing the research and saying what's going on in the world. And, my character Allison, who is, a former social media star who sort of fell from grace and has been kind of living on the fringes. I mean, I guess that she's our Obi-Wan. She's really the one who knows the bigger picture, or at least knows more of it than anyone else. And geez, is Gordon's grandmother Luke?
Hmm.
she's the character who has always kind of wanted to be in the limelight, but is kind of just condemned to just being a normal person. But now that the world is going potato and she starts to find her footing by becoming her own influencer, and she's really rising to the occasion. So yeah, I think that
Hmm.
Gordon might be C3PO.
Interesting. Interesting. That may be true. That makes sense, right? That makes sense. So definitely C3PO, definitely a more passive observer, passive protagonist, to use your word. So Gerard, I gotta ask, man. So how did you learn how to write? Because the book is fun. It really is, right? I'm not. I say that it's just a fun book. It's super easy to read. It's you can sit down and in 2 hours you read the book and you laugh a little bit. And to your point, right? You fall in love with potatoes. But how did you kind of find your voice? Was it, did this take like 10 years to write? Is this your magnum opus or what, for no, for real, man. I'm curious because it's fiction and I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I guess Bilge Monkey is sort of fiction, living as a pirate DJ, but tell me about, the process, man. I'm curious.
Well, as far as how I learned to write, a lot of that was with before I had the Bilge Monkey radio where I was playing pirate music, was bilgemonkey.com, where I reviewed pirate stuff.
That's right.
But I'd review rum, I'd review pirate movies, pirate video games, anything pirate themed. That was my whole bread and butter, was pirate stuff. And it was always important to me to the how I wrote it was always very important. It's not just I want to review, but I want it to be a fun to read review. And so, for a good 10 years, I was doing that all the time, writing the stuff where I'm very much focusing on making sure that it's an entertaining read, not just an informative read. And then I would also blend that with my later experience working in advertising, where, you know, brevity is the soul of wit in advertising. You got to be concise. And if a few words aren't needed, you cut them out. And that's a big part of why, as you said, it's a 2-3 hour read. It's 160 pages in print, but it's a very fast read. And I was very much aiming to write it as long as it needed to be and not longer. And there were so many pieces. It's like, okay, this doesn't drive the plot forward. Or you may have even noticed, there's some major segments where I kind of skip over what seems like should be a huge action packed moment, but it really wouldn't. To my mind, it would have been a diversion from the actual narrative. It's like sometimes that big battle scene, just waking up in the aftermath of it and kind of remembering that battle scene lets you kind of focus on the highlights and the stuff that you really need to know, rather than getting bogged down in here's a giant battle scene, especially in this case, because it's human versus potatoes. And the potatoes are potatoes. I mean, there's only so much a potato does, because these are not walking around, rolling around of their own volition potatoes like in the old Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, where they have teeth and they're rolling around and going rah, 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 chasing people through the streets. We don't see potatoes do that. We don't see potatoes in action, but we kind of see hints of it. And so we remember those things. Or, we might have a dream sequence that sort of encapsulates the major points that you need for the plot, even though it's not 100% accurate to what actually happened, but it lets you know what's inside the character's head. And I think I've gone off on a bit of a tangent here.
No, but I think it's an interesting tangent. I really do. I was going to say, are potatoes the passive protagonist of the vegetable family?
I think in a lot of ways, yes. I mean, they're, potatoes, when you talk about them, I mean, the couch potato term, which this was something I didn't get to use in this book, but it was amazing to me, because couch potato, which connects so directly, even though they came up in opposite, or they came up completely separately, boob tube, tuber means potatoes. But the thing that pulls that all together is, I believe his name was Farnsworth. A young Farnsworth was sitting in a potato field, noticing the rows of how the potatoes were planted. And that's what gave him the idea of a way of breaking down visual data to create what later became his invention, the television.
Hmm.
Potatoes are responsible for television, the boob tube, and couch potatoes.
Wow.
We're just
Powerful
we're just
potatoes.
marching to their drum. We just don't know it.
Wow. Wow. Who knew that potatoes were so important? So, Jordan, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, man. So what's your favorite preparation of potato?
Oh, I am so into French fries. I only order burgers because they're a conduit for French fries. And that's not even true because I like burgers, but still, the French fries matter. And so, yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, French fries matter. That's good
But
to know. So, with ketchup, with salt, how do you take your fries?
they need to be salty. And I do like ketchup. So,
Nice.
yes to
Very
both.
nice.
Now
Good.
and
Well,
then,
French.
special seasoning. There's some that,
Mm,
yeah, Cajun seasoning, or now and then you find places that do that kind of stuff. That can be really good too.
So now you're on the West Coast. In-N-Out burgers better
I've
than
been a
White
couple of
Castle? What do you
times,
think?
and I gotta say, I'm a little underwhelmed. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that about In and Out. That might be putting a big target on my back. I like Five Guys,
Yeah, me too. I like their fries way better. I completely agree with that. I'm a Five Guys fan as
but
well. So
yeah, and their burgers are great too.
agreed. Yeah, I like them with jalapenos, fresh jalapeno slices
Mm.
for me, and fresh onions. So Five Guys makes me happy too, man. So very, very cool. So you're working on a sequel. What else is going on? What's next for Gerard Heidgerken?
Ooh, well, the sequel is one thing I'm trying to work on. It's a little tough right now just because I'm kind of having that coming down from writing the first one, and also learning the special challenges that come with trying to get a self-published book seen. It's a challenge. It's a task. There's so much noise out there, and not all self-published books are necessarily worth attention. So you get kind of in this very large pot. There's so many self-published gems, but there's also so many you got to dig through before you find those. So I'm in that whole pile. So anyways, the marketing has been a big thing that I've been focusing on, and then just working on getting some actual paying work. I have some freelance projects that I'm doing right now, so that's not the fun stuff, but it's kind of fun, some of it, but not podcast tell us all about it fun.
There you
But
go.
yeah, the hope is definitely that in the next couple of months I can buckle down again and start thinking about, because I picture this as being a three-parter that kind of brings us around
Trilogy.
full circle. Still, it's very much about social media as kind of its subtext about how we just worship the things we worship, and but also it's very much going to be about potatoes. And I look forward to exploring new levels of potato weirdness that still somehow has a point, because that was really also very important to me. I didn't want to just write a book that was just a silly book about potatoes. I wanted to make sure that it was somehow saying something about just life in general. And, in my book, it really is that I think a lot of what it's about is, as you get further and further into the adult world, you keep thinking you're going to find grown-ups, and you keep thinking that other people have the answers and know what they're doing, that CEOs know how to run a business, and doctors know everything about the human body. And just the more you learn, the more you realize that everyone's just kind of guessing their way through it. And so it suddenly becomes not necessarily so ridiculous that it really is potatoes all the way up who are controlling everything, because it's just not that well constructed.
That's fantastic, man. Potatoes are life, and a great metaphor, and a great vehicle for your book. I mean, Godsquatter, it is a fun book, 2 3 hour read. Pick up a copy. Get to know Gerard Heidgerken at godsquatter.com, or if you can spell Heidgerken, you can always find him there as well, right?
Good
He's
luck
got
with
a good
that.
last name, right? He's got a good last name like mine, but it's on screen there, gerardheidgerken.com. And Gerard, it is fun to spend some time with you, man. Congratulations on a wonderful book. I've got some ideas when we get done for how you can possibly position your potato love in different ways. So thanks for spending some time with me, buddy. It's great to see
Thanks
you.
for having me. It was awesome.
Heck yeah. Thanks, man. Good times. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And may the God Squad